Thank you, Linda Jo. As she mentioned, she is a fellow alum of Edinburgh University, and so we also want to thank you for having us. This has been such a wonderful opportunity, so great event. Thank you once again. Everyone give a round of applause. Okay. So today what I want to talk with all of you about is understanding, recruiting, and managing millennials and Generation IY. And for a lot of folks, Generation IY might be a term that you have not heard of, and so we'll be defining that a little bit for you as well today. So I want to start off with a stereotype. Okay, this was the cover of Time magazine not too long ago. Does anyone recognize this cover? This came out probably about 2 or 3 years ago. So for a lot of millennials, they find that and I am a millennial, I should start off by saying that. They're split into 2 groups, and I'll tell you about how that works. This is a stereotype that really kind of halts them sometimes in the job hiring and search process, and a lot of people tend to see millennials one kind of way. And so I want to show you some research that tells you exactly what this generation is, how do we define them, and what are some of their characteristics. So millennials defined. The first thing to understand is that millennials are actually split into 2 groups. The first group is the one I belong to. These are what we call our older millennials, born roughly between 1980 and 1995. And I say rough because depending on what research you read, these years are defined very differently, okay? So these are the rough estimates for this group. This group of millennials tend to share some cultural tendencies with the generation before them, which was Gen X. For our younger millennials, born between roughly 1996 or the mid-90s up until roughly 2011, we refer to these young people as Generation IY. They are also occasionally referred to as Gen Z, but either way, they are kind of grouped in with millennials. So the reason this is important is because millennials are used as this umbrella term to define people that are anywhere from 37 years old down to potentially 6 years old, okay? And obviously, there's going to be very, very different characteristics across that spectrum. The other important thing to know is that millennials are actually a larger generation than the baby boomers. They are the largest generation in history. Again, born roughly between 1980 and 2000, unless we count IY. About 2 out of every 10 millennials have a parent who was an immigrant. Okay, this is the most diverse group of people that we have ever had, is definitely in our country. They tend to display distrust of authority and institutions, and a lot of that has to do with some of the things that they have seen as they've grown up, right? So the Enron scandal, 9/11, a lot of these things that they have kind of come of age dealing with has led to a lot less trust of institutions than some of those that came before them. They also tend to be very isolated, which might seem kind of strange, but the term that's often used to describe millennials is isolated together. So creating isolation through engaging in niche social media circles, or what I always tell people is if you come on a college campus, you can play a fun game, which is try to find a student that doesn't have earbuds in their ears at any given moment, right? So they tend to isolate themselves off both through auditory means and through what they engage with, but they tend to be very connected online. They also tend to be very overwhelmed. Okay, so I work in higher education, and we see this all the time, right? We have students that come in that have what we call snowplow parents, right? Who kind of just plow everything out of their children's way. It's a little different than helicopters. They're not hovering, they're plowing, okay? So they're getting all the obstacles out of their way. This generation is taught that self-actualization and that speed are very, very important, okay? So that really impacts the way you can recruit and manage them. Going along with that, at least in the college environment, A lot of students, over 90% in some studies, report that they feel overwhelmed. 40% roughly say they are depressed, and anxiety is another huge problem. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. This cartoon kind of illustrates one of those reasons. So it says, you get 5 minutes between soccer and piano. What do you do with all that free time, right? So we have a generation of students who are very, very micromanaged by parents who want to set them up for success when they get to college. They're also extremely connected. And this is really the main differentiating factor between those two groups that I mentioned earlier. The younger group are what we call digital natives. Okay, so they have never lived in a time without internet. It is very much a part of their lives. If something is not shared digitally, it's almost as though it didn't happen. And that is a very different way of thinking about our lives than other generations prior to them. So I always tell managers, one of the common complaints I get is that they need to get off their phones, right? The millennials are on their phones a lot. And I tell them that, telling them that they shouldn't be on Facebook or Twitter or whatever it may be is sort of like telling you that you shouldn't be able to schedule a doctor's appointment during office hours, right? It just seems kind of ludicrous because to them, that's just part of their lives, okay? And that's an area of misunderstanding. The other thing that millennials tend to experience is a high level of career stress. So we know that freshmen who start college now, roughly 3 out of every 10 of those freshmen are going to work in jobs that don't exist now. So when they graduate, they're going to work in a job that may not exist. Okay? So from a career development perspective, it becomes more of a challenge to try and funnel them in to the right career path. 1 out of every 4 freshmen won't graduate. Okay? $35,000 is the average amount of debt that is now carried in this country by college graduates. That number has increased by $10,000 just in the last 5 years. 40% of freshmen change their major, and only half are employed 6 months post-graduation. So return on investment is extremely important, and career stress is also something that they experience. Anyone heard the term FOMO? Anyone familiar with that? Fear of missing out. So because the generation's so connected online, they also tend to feel a lot of pressure when they look at those in their network who are seemingly very successful, right? That have careers, are getting married, having families, and then that can make them feel even more overwhelmed. So what is the research on how to actually motivate this generation when it comes to recruiting them and having them in your business? Salary is actually not the primary motivating factor for this generation, which seems a little unusual because we talked about school debt. But remember that they've been raised to self-actualize and to pursue happiness and fulfillment. So while salary is a motivator, it's not the primary motivator. Instead, millennials report in all of the research that they need to feel meaningfully connected to their work. And I wouldn't say that that's very different than a lot of other people as well, but it is very important when you're trying to recruit this particular demographic. They also are very accustomed to transparency. They value growth and development, and they expect growth and development in their careers to happen very quickly. Remembering that they came up in a time when speed was good, slow was bad, okay? Clearly defined goals, clear expectations, and clear feedback, okay? This is how they were raised. Our K through 12 system and our college system are set up to reinforce clear expectations, meeting clear goals, and getting clear, consistent feedback. So then we take people out of that system and we tell them, okay, now you have to be comfortable and tolerant of ambiguity. Now you have to be a self-starter. Now you have to know what to do. When for potentially 22 years, they've had everything told to them, okay? So these are some things that are important to remember for those who want to manage them. So I want to talk a little bit about the generational weaknesses, and then I'm going to kind of reframe that for you as to how these can be strengths. So some of the common complaints about young people, and I would say that a lot of these complaints were made about baby boomers and a lot of other generations before them, but is that they are entitled, that they are narcissistic, that they don't respect hierarchy, and that they expect to be entertained at all times. And so why is this? What are some of these common employer complaints? So some of the things that I hear in my role working with employers and business owners are up on the screen here for you. So things like they expect a promotion very quickly after 2-3 months. Things like they can't problem solve, they need a lot of hand holding, their salary expectations aren't realistic, they don't have manners, they're job hoppers. These are the things that I hear all the time in my role, and I actually work directly with employers and college students, so it's a little unique. So why is this? So I don't expect you to be able to read all of these bullet points that I have here on the screen, but again, I've already talked about that sort of expectation, reward, feedback cycle, right, in K through 12 and college education. It's a very test-centric environment, okay? So having that kind of independent reward is something that they're very keen and very positively reinforced to expect. They also are a generation that tends to lack a lot of meaningful interaction with people outside their peer group. So we find that a lot of kids that come to college now have not had a part-time job. They have not done some of the things that previous generations have done that have had them exposed to people who were in authority positions over them. They've also largely been told that college is a necessity and that going to college automatically means career success. And what's missing from that equation is the discussion about the work and the outside experience and networking that are so important to supplement that college degree. Slow is bad. Okay. The other thing with this generation is that they don't have clear distinctions between work time and personal time, right? It's all kind of blended together 24/7. They're connected all the time, as are people who are not millennials. We're all on our phones checking our email at 10 o'clock at night, responding to emails, right? So, that clear kind of division isn't really there anymore. The other thing to remember, and this kind of goes back to the snowplow kind of comparison that I made earlier. Removing barriers for children often leads to them not developing some critical coping skills, or what we call grit. There's a whole movement right now in education around grit, and it's actually led by Angela Duckworth out of the University of Pennsylvania, the Grit Lab. If you want to look that up, it's fascinating work. But that is something that we're also seeing, is that those coping skills aren't being developed the same way that they may have been developed in previous generations. Lastly, learning. Okay, so one of the things that I contend with really frequently is that business owners or hiring managers may expect the college graduate to come in with everything they need to know. And the fact is that research tells us that approximately 70% of our learning in our career happens on the job. It does not happen in college, right? So having that expectation can make things very difficult for both you and the people who are going to come work for you. And so making sure that you're engaging your new professionals is really, really important. So we talked a little bit about some of the bad stereotypes. So what are the good ones? The good news is that this generation tends to be very intolerant of injustice, kind of that rat race mentality of the 80s, and so that doesn't really resonate with them. It doesn't really jive with them, okay? They're very equality-minded. They're very group-oriented, okay? So they tend to be very collaborative and enjoy working with others. They're resourceful, and they do tend to be very creative. So some of the strengths, according to research, this is the most educated generation in history. They are, as I mentioned, collaborative and team-oriented. They are digital natives, right? So they're very comfortable navigating digital environments, which is extremely important. I know even being here, I've talked to so many companies that are really living their business lives online, right? So having that is really important. And they are very open and transparent, so that's another thing that can be very beneficial. The reason that these are beneficial factors is that we are now entering what sociologists and organizational psychologists call the fourth industrial revolution. So this is where we are turning into a knowledge economy. Okay, so you're no longer going to necessarily advance your business through muscle as much as you are through your comfort with technology and advanced technological and digital skills. Okay, so the most successful organizations are those that are going to be learning organizations, embrace ambiguity, embrace professional development, and stay very, very current. millennials being comfortable with all of those sorts of environments can really help transform and move your company forward. And again, because they are the largest generation in history, they are going to dramatically change the working environment, just like baby boomers did before them. So now that I've hopefully helped you understand millennials and how they're defined, I'm going to talk a little bit about some strategies that you can use to attract new talent and actually recruit them. Maybe. Let's do this. Okay. So the number one thing that you need to be thinking about if you are a small business owner, in addition to marketing your company, is also engaging in social media to attract new talent to your company. Be responsive and engaging in your social media. So I've worked with a lot of employers who create a Twitter and they're very excited, but then they don't actually engage with their Twitter and they don't respond to people when they tweet them. So you have to think of this as a 24/7 responsibility. So not only for your brand awareness and your marketing, but also for your talent and your recruiting efforts. Being very active, being very authentic, being very friendly, and having original content. These are all really, really important factors because millennials can sniff out inauthenticity very, very quickly because they are digital natives. This is a space that they live in all the time. Approximately 67% of first-time job seekers, so this would be this college-educated demographic, do use social media in their job search. Okay. I actually teach a career preparation seminar to business students, and they tell me this all the time when I talk to them about job searching. They're going online, they're going on Instagram because they want to know what the company is all about. They want to know what that company is like. So they're going online and they're looking at that social media. So if you don't have a robust presence there, you're potentially missing out on some top talent who can really help your company. And 89% are using their mobile device to job search. So again, if you don't have a mobile-friendly website, if you don't have a web presence, and if you're not interacting with Handshake and some of these other platforms to really reach out to this demographic, you're missing the boat with a huge population of people. Having a brand is extraordinarily important, just as important for recruiting as it is for marketing your company. So knowing why you exist and being able to communicate why you exist and why you are in your business to the people who could potentially work for you is extremely important. Remembering that young people need to feel meaningfully connected to the work that they do. So if you don't know why you do what you do, you can't expect people to want to come and help you be successful because they can't buy into your vision either. Okay? So connect to the meaning of why you're in business and be able to articulate that to the people that could potentially work for you. The other thing that's really important to remember is that for approximately the last decade, we've been in an employer's market, meaning that there were far more candidates available than jobs. Okay? We are starting to see that shift. Okay, the National Association of Colleges and Employers measures this every year, and just from 2015 to 2016, we saw a 6% drop in the number of new college graduates who were unemployed. That's pretty significant. So that shift means that there's going to be an increased need for you to sell yourself to potential candidates, right? Just like the candidates have to sell themselves to you. So my advice to you is to not create sort of needless barriers to employment or to internships with your company. So if you have very redundant application processes, that is something that is really going to hurt you in the long run. Okay, so if you are at an event like this, where you're going to a career fair and you're talking with potential candidates, it's really great to be able to leverage that experience in the moment you're having it, rather than say, oh, okay, this is great, go apply online. Go apply online, right? Because then you're really missing out on that opportunity to build that relationship with them. The other thing is that, candidates really look at the 360 when they're considering opportunities. So if you are a small business or a new business and you can't necessarily offer a really high salary, then that's fine, but you can make that up in other sorts of perks, basics, promises, and we can talk a little bit about what that looks like. The other thing is that you really need to be treating your job candidates or potential job candidates with a high level of respect. This is a very, very vocal generation. So if they have a really negative experience with you or with the interview process, they will go online and they will write a review about it. So companies like Glassdoor have really great online resources where you can go and research what it's like to interview with a company. So if you want to make sure, you do want to make sure that everything someone says about your company is above board and positive. Really good example of this is that I had a career fair on our campus probably about a month ago. And we also invited a large group of high school students who were visiting campus and wanted to know more about the Edinboro experience. So I said, bring them on down, have them see the employers that we're bringing here so they can kind of get a feel for it. And one of the high school students' mothers serves on a board with me, and later in the week she shared with me that her daughter was in tears because she approached a table and the woman said to her, it was a hospital, and the woman said, hold on, are you one of those high school kids? And she said, yeah, and she was like, don't even bother. Okay, and it was so embarrassing this girl is 15 years old, right? It was so embarrassing to her that she was in tears. She told her mother, who told everyone else, it got back to me, that employer will not be back on our campus, right? And how many other people are they going to tell about that experience? So be open-minded about the kind of interactions that you have with all people, because even though they may not seem like your direct client or your direct prospect, they could know someone who is. Okay, so following through with candidates, if someone calls you or reaches out to you and says, I would really love an internship opportunity and you don't have one available, that's totally fine, but you have to be respectful and respond, right? And let them know that, and then, follow through with them if you do have those things available, because again, this is a very vocal generation. They're not going to hesitate to tell everyone if they had a bad experience with you or with your company. Okay, so it's always been critical, but now more so than ever. The other thing I would advise you to do is to think about building pipelines and building pools of talent. I talk with a lot of businesses that are relatively small and they don't have a budget to hire, and I completely get that. But every business owner's goal is to get to a point where they can employ a lot of people and they can grow and expand. And if you want to make sure that you have broad social media marketing, or you want to hire the top talent, you need to be targeting younger and younger and younger, okay? So targeting underclassmen, freshmen, sophomores, high school students, so that they're aware of your brand. One of the reasons why I was so excited to come here today was because I'm learning about a lot of different businesses that I didn't know about. So when I go back to my campus, I can share that information with students. So when they approach me and say, hey, I'm really interested in working in graphic design, I live in Pittsburgh, I'm getting excited. I can go back to my spreadsheet and go through all the people I talked to today and say, okay, here's who you can contact, okay? So targeting outside of what you might typically think is your candidate pool can be very, very helpful to you. Another thing I would advise a business owner to consider is offering internships and job shadows. And you can do this for high school students. You can offer internships. Most high schools are starting to really increase the use of internships with their students. So, really showing them what your company is all about rather than telling them. Okay, so not only are you building a talent pipeline for your company, that student's going to be excited and go and tell potentially other people about your company, which is also very helpful. And then lastly, LinkedIn recruiting. So LinkedIn is getting better and better when it comes to recruiting talent. And for job seekers, it's getting amazing, right? You can actually indicate that you're open to opportunities privately without anyone knowing other than those recruiters. So getting on LinkedIn, engaging with content, recruiting talent, this is a really good way to recruit passive talent, okay? So how do you actually manage and retain millennials? The fact is, hiring is expensive. Hiring and training is very, very costly. The average to replace a millennial employee is approximately $20,000. Okay, so that factors in the lost productivity for training, the cost of posting a job, and the cost of having to pay your next candidate more due to wage inflation. So you really want to make sure that you're onboarding and training people appropriately to help retain them. One of the things that millennials respond really, really well to is structure. They like to be told, this is what I expect of you. They like to have it very clearly laid out because that is how they've been raised. In the K through 12 and the higher ed system, everything is very, very explicit. This is what we want from you. So if you can mirror that experience with them, they're going to respond very well to that, okay? Working together to set goals and provide feedback regularly is also very important. This is probably one of the biggest differences between baby boomers and older Gen Xers and younger people. Most of the people I know who have a lot of experience, who are seasoned, would say, I don't want to hear it, I'll see you during my annual review, right? Like, they're good with that. But younger people need that a lot more frequently. They want to know if they're doing a good job. They want to know if they're doing a bad job. Okay, so you have to be consistent and frequent with that. Daily, weekly, whatever you can do is a smart way to do it as long as it's frequent. Being very transparent and very, very clear about your expectations. So assume nothing, okay? Don't assume that your new young college graduate employee knows what to wear to work. Don't assume that they know not to walk into the CEO's office and tell them their grand idea. Okay, because they may not know that. So you want to be very clear about those sorts of things up front. And then I would also say providing very clear expectations about your policies with respect to promotions. So if you can tell someone up front, hey, yeah, we'd love to have you grow with our company. We generally don't like to promote someone until they've been with us about a year. That's going to be a really good thing to tell them. So then you don't run into that issue of after 2 months, they're expecting that promotion. So retraining millennials, again, the important thing to know is that the statistics tell us that millennials change jobs about every 2 to 3 years on average. And by the time they reach 40, they will have had 7 different careers. This is a huge, huge change in the way we're approaching job management and workforce development. 60% of candidates in this age range are open to new possibilities, which means they're passive candidates, which means other companies are trying to recruit them away from you. So retaining them is something that you have to be very, very intentional about because they're not as loyal to institutions as previous or older generations. They're not going to feel bad about jumping ship and taking another opportunity, right? If it's there, they'll take it. Another thing that they tend to experience is kind of a ceiling, right, of baby boomers who are living longer, working longer, and keeping their positions for a lot longer. So it can be necessary to change jobs for that promotion or for that increase in pay. That was my experience, right? And so job hopping isn't really becoming, or it's not really a thing anymore like it used to be. So I talked about assuming nothing and being very clear. Lastly, I just want to really express and really impress that millennials can really help your company. And the fact is, they're the largest generation in the job market. In 2016, millennials became the largest proportion of workers in the United States. So even though there tends to be a lot of grumbling among some companies about some of the things that they're having to shift and change in order to better accommodate this group of young professionals, if you don't do that, your company's not going to succeed because they're your clients, they're your customers, they're your workers, and they are going to fundamentally change and shift the way we approach work and our own expectations about things like normal business hours and so on. Okay. They also are very open, or they tend to be open about questioning old policies that don't make sense. So if you have policies in place and you say, and they're going to ask you why that is, and if you say, well, we just have always done it that way, that's not necessarily something that's going to fly, right? So take advantage of that, right? If someone's asking you why, ask them why they're asking. Is there a better way to do this? And put those kinds of things in context as appropriate. So some additional strategies to consider when it comes to things like retention. Team building, mission building, extremely important. Leadership development and ongoing training. Okay, you have a generation of people who really want to learn more, grow in your company, do other things. So offering those sorts of programs can be very helpful. Flex time, right? They're on their phones, they're on their computers 24/7. If your work can be done from a coffee shop and you've established that trust with a candidate, maybe that's something you could consider, right? Not every company can do that. I work in a college, we can't do flex time, right? But some companies can, and that's something that can be very, very helpful and can save the company money because you're not paying to turn on the lights and the heat and all this other stuff, right? Understanding and connecting to your mission. Okay, so the why matters more than the what. So if you go to career fairs or you go to college campuses and you're talking with potential candidates, don't hyper focus on what you do, focus more on why you do what you do, okay? Because that is going to really get that message across a lot more effectively to the people who could work for you. Some of the things that don't work, authoritarian directive styles tend to not be as effective. This is a very horizontal generation. Hierarchy isn't really part of their worldview. Blind compliance with ambiguous expectations. Okay, nobody really likes that. So if you can cut down on that, that's great. Trying to motivate young professionals with the kinds of things that tend to or may have motivated previous generations more. So more money, corner office, prestige. Everybody likes that, but it can't be the only thing you're offering, okay, because it won't help you with retention. And then confining the ways that they can contribute to your company. So if you have someone that has ideas outside of their role and you say to them, that's great, but that's not why you're here, that's not what you do, okay, then you're potentially missing out on someone seeing potentially a better way for you to maximize your resources. And the end is near. So in a few years, millennials are going to dominate upper management. Okay, so in 2016, they became the largest proportion of people in the workforce. They're still largely entry and mid-level in their career. But within a decade or so, they will start rising up and taking those upper level positions. So things are going to change whether anybody likes it or not, okay? Baby boomers and Gen X dramatically shifted and changed a lot of things about the way we work, right? And a lot of things with equality and opportunity, and that's just going to continue as we grow. So I couldn't end this without also providing some advice to millennials and to Generation IY workers. So the number one thing that I would say is that when you're starting your career and you're going into the workforce, you really need to be open. Okay, you need to be open to learning and realize that your degree is not the be-all end-all or whatever you may have up to that point. Okay, you still have a lot to learn, and you can learn a lot from people who are seasoned professionals and who have brought you into their companies. Take time to learn a company's culture before you just want to start contributing, okay, because you really need to kind of sit back and look at how people interact. What are the dynamics of this company? What is expected before you just immediately start offering suggestions? Be very mindful of your manners and the hierarchy that does exist, okay? So even if it doesn't make sense to you, take some time to kind of recognize it and be mindful of it before you start just making actions or taking actions. Ask questions, okay, before you start offering advice. Be willing to prove yourself before asking for benefits and perks. So I mentioned flex time. Flex time is a great perk for a lot of companies, but sometimes a company has to build trust in you before they're comfortable letting you work from home, okay? So recognize that. And then lastly, ask before using technology on the job. So if you're gonna use your phone or you're gonna use your laptop and that's very natural to you, just ask, hey, are we allowed to use our phones here? Because I see companies here that would be like, absolutely, that's what we do. We want you on your phone. But in my own, I work in a university. We hired a student employee, and all he did all the time was sit on his cell phone. And I had a conversation with him about it, and he legitimately had no idea that that wasn't okay. No one had ever said that to him, right? And he just grew up with it with him all the time. He didn't conceptualize that that wasn't okay. So just ask that question ahead of time. So I know this was a lot of dense kind of information about a lot of different topics. So I want to thank you for your time, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try and tackle those. Any questions? Oh, yeah. So the question was, Any questions for me after today, how to reach me? Was that the question? Absolutely. So email, phone, website. My name's Monica Clem. I'm the director of the Career Center at Edinburgh University. We're part of a 14 university state system. I also oversee the State System Career Professionals Association. So if you have questions, I'm happy to provide any information I can. Just shoot me an email. It's probably the best way to do it. The last piece of advice I'll offer, for those of you who might have children who are approaching their college search, I talk with a lot of different stakeholders in this process. When you're going to colleges and when you're going to campuses and you're doing these things, ask those colleges about things like career development. What kinds of professional development programs and resources are offered? What about internships? How do they facilitate this process? Because it's much, much more developmental now than it is about services, right? It's about helping that young person become savvy and professional as they make that transition into the post-college life, and less about things like, oh, write me a resume and help me find a job. Okay, it's not quite that simple anymore. So that would just be the last piece of advice I would offer. So if there's no questions, thank you.